Welcome to the channel. I'm Tony the Technician. Today we're going to be going into my 23 Colorado Trail Boss, which already comes with a factory 2-inch lift, but we're going to be doing Rough Country's 2-inch lift on top of that, and this should level the truck out, give it a nice ride height. I think it's going to turn out really nicely. It's a very affordable set. It's quality stuff. As far as a basic 2-inch kit, it's really hard to mess up, and it's a pretty simple install, so if you can do it yourself, you can save yourself hundreds of dollars over paying somebody to install this 2-inch lift. So I'm going to show you guys how to go through the process, and at the end of the video I actually get my wheels and tires in. As soon as I got done installing the lift kit, I got the wheels and tires in, so it was perfect. So I'll throw a clip in at the end with everything installed, the lift kit and the wheels and tires, and what I went with. So I really hope you guys enjoy it. If you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, please drop a comment down below. I'll do my best to answer it. I didn't have the camera set up for every single thing. I'm not going to show you, loosening every single bolt. I'll show you where the bolt is, which ones to loosen, how to remove it, things like that. It's going to be a very basic and hopefully informative video. So let's go ahead and get right into it. First things first, make sure you got shade. I made my shade. Maybe you have shade already, or you can do it in the garage. I don't really have the room right now. Make sure you chalk your wheels, get it lifted up, put it on jack stand, get the tire up off the ground. Make sure to break the lug nuts loose first, and then go ahead and remove the tire. It's a 22 millimeter to remove the lug nuts, and then you're going to want to disconnect the power steering, which are going to be these two plugs right here that connect to the back right here. Really easy to remove. Make sure those are disconnected. And then if you're working on a rough surface, a little mat or a kneeling pad is a great tool to have. Next, with a 21 millimeter and another socket or something like the pliers wrench to remove the tie rod end from the steering knuckle. Once you have that removed, you'll come up here and you'll remove all of these clips holding this line in, just to provide slack while you're working. And once you disconnect the steering knuckle from the upper control arm and it comes down, you're going to want slack in here. So just go ahead and remove all of those. Make sure you retain this hardware for your tie rod. Now we're going to remove the upper control arm from the steering knuckle with this 18 millimeter fastener right here. Sounds like this one has already actually separated. Sometimes you have to smack this with a hammer. I'm gonna go ahead and get a jack and just put it underneath my lower control arm. There's that. Make sure to just go ahead and reinstall this up here so you don't lose it. The next part you won't really be able to see, but you have 3 fasteners on top. You have one right here, one right there, and one right there underneath my finger. I know it's blurry, but those 3 fasteners are going to be what holds the top of the strut assembly in, so go ahead and remove those. So we've got one removed. They are an 18 millimeter fastener, and these ones are actually going to be replaced with some that are included in the kit that are actually going to be 17 millimeter fasteners. So there is plenty of room for a wrench to get in here and get on the fasteners. Once you have those 3 removed, you may have some wiring harnesses connected to the tops of the fasteners that are just kind of clipped on. You can either push them off and use a ratcheting wrench, or you can just use the open end and remove the nut and it'll push the wiring harness off of it. Next, we will be removing the bottom 2 that hold the strut to the lower control arm here. So that is going to be a 15 millimeter. Here are the 2 fasteners that go up through the lower control arm, or A arm, and into the lower portion of the strut. I just set mine out with the impact, and I have a jack down here. It did move a little bit, but it's not going to go far. It's just the weight of this and the sway bar. It won't go far. It will kind of shift the steering knuckle, but nothing to be worried about. And then now it's a matter of getting the A-arm pushed down far enough to slide the strut assembly out. The fun part is going to be getting it back in once the spacers are installed, you're gonna have to basically bounce on this thing or figure out some way to strap this further down to get it in there, and then get these lined up after getting the strut assembly mounted back up on the top. So that'll be the fun part. This part's pretty easy, so let's go ahead and get it removed. So there's the shock. Now we can start the fun part. This is what we just did, was extremely easy, maybe 10 minutes. The long part is going to be carefully using a spring compressor. Unless you just don't care, then go about it all willy-nilly. But let's go ahead and compress this thing. Before we get that mounted though, sorry about the background noise, somebody's doing some lawn work. We do want to make our marks because these 3 posts have to line up, and this bottom portion has to line up the same as before. So if you get this clocked wrong, then it won't be able to be reinstalled properly. So it all needs to be the same as before. So I'm gonna go from this stud, make a line. That's going to ensure that I can clock this bushing, this top plate, and the spring all in the same order. And I'm going to do the same to the bottom. I'll go from basically the end of the coil with the isolator, the bottom mounting bracket. So we have the bottom marked and the top marked. Now we can go ahead and install our compressor. All right, so here we have the McPherson strut compressor, spring compressor, and there are 2 clamps, and then you have these locking pins. Basically get these installed to where they fit the best, and you're going to be able to get a good compression with them. Also make sure that you may have to alternate, depends on the side and how these are oriented, but you need to make sure that these threaded rods, like if I were to have them pointing this way, they're going to run into this top mount. So with this side, I have to have them both going the other direction. On the other side, I actually had them alternating, and that worked perfectly. So just figure out how they're going to mount best. Make sure you have enough room to compress the spring. Right now they're at 6 1/4 and 6.5 inches from one end to the other in between here. And I'm gonna compress them to about 4 inches or so. Then what we're gonna have to do is remove this 18mm fastener from up here. If you have the spring compressed, then this rod in the center is actually going to just turn with it. So you may be able to break it loose now while it's got tension on it, and then remove it afterwards. I just had to end up using an impact on the other side in order to get it off, since it was so loose, since the spring was compressed. And you may not be able to tell that the spring is compressed from the top cap. You just, because we're compressing from this coil to this coil, the top coil and the bottom coil aren't really compressing much. So you may still believe there's tension here, but once you start to remove that top nut, you'll realize whether or not there's tension on it. So just go ahead, take your time, and compress the spring. So we have this compressed to about 4 inches now, so about 2.5 inches that it's been compressed overall. So just keep in mind, no matter how much you compress it, unless you do a lot right now, you're gonna have to compress it more once you get that bottom spacer on here. It's gonna be easier once you get the spring off of the strut assembly anyways. So the only real fear here is launching this top hat off of it. Once you get the spring off, you can compress it. You don't have to worry about, removing that nut anymore. Just get it done. So I'm gonna go ahead, drink water. About to have a heat stroke. Go ahead and back that thing up. Back it up. One thing to keep in mind with these compressors, you want to keep them one on one side, one on the other. Don't have them close to each other. You don't want to bind the spring up or anything. Now it's basically on its last 5 threads. So I'm just gonna go ahead and compress this just a few more times just to make sure. Once again, it's important to have your paint marks too before you take this apart. There's your nut. And your assembly. Remove your spring. just leave it like this, you're gonna have to compress it more. The next part will be removing this cap here, which I'll just take a screwdriver and a hammer and kind of tap that down off of there. There we go. Now the cap is removed. Now it will be removing this guy here, and then it's gonna have to be knocked off towards the threaded end since we have the lower strut mount there. So we're just gonna tap around here with a dead blow. Now once that's removed, we can start installing the spacer. You have your preload spacer here. It has a beveled edge on one side that is going to face the threads. So drop it down on here. It's just gonna kind of seat itself when you put this back on. And if you want, you can give it a few taps to kind of seat it. We'll keep those lined up, but obviously this is how much higher it's going to sit now. And now we go ahead and compress the spring more, because there's no way I'm going to get the spring on and be able to thread that nut back onto here with the top hat. You got to compress it more. Then we have our 3 fasteners from the kit that will be for mounting the top hat studs in the upper mount. And then we have 2 1/4-inch spacers and a 1/8-inch spacer, and you'll have to line these holes up. They only mount one way, but this goes on last before reinstalling it into the truck. So once you get the spring compressed even more, which now we are at 3 1/4, so we've basically went down a whole nother inch. Making sure these are lined up again. Make sure you put your dust cap on. Line up. And now the fun part, which if compressing this wasn't fun enough, decompressing it for the next 2.5 inches is not fun either. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that, and it'll be ready to be reinstalled. Now that we have that decompressed, now you're gonna take your spacers and place them up top. Remember, they're only gonna go in one orientation. 1/4-inch and 1/8-inch. Now we can go ahead and place this back up into the upper mount. And it will go just like this. All you got to do is remember the bottom is angled, so like this, so it's going to sit just like that. One thing you'll have to do is probably bounce on this, or find some way to pull your lower A-arm down in order to get the bottom of the strut mount into its proper location. Basically what you're going to want to do is just straighten your rotor so it's parallel with the vehicle, and push down on it. Then it's going to make it a little bit easier to push the A-arm down. And once you do so, you can get the bolts started in the bottom. So I'm just going to quickly run them up with my impact driver, but then I'll snug them up with my ratchet. Also, you can look up all the torque specs as well online. Now the bottoms are done. Now we take our 3 locking 17mm ones and reinstall them up here. We're going to reconnect the upper control arm to the steering knuckle. I'm just going to lift this assembly up, and then I'll come in and I'll push down on the upper control arm. Now we'll go ahead and snug that up. So next, we'll take the tie rod end, remove the fastener. Just like so. This is 18 up top, 21 down below. Center section may start to turn, so you'll probably have to use the pliers wrench or another smaller socket and a wrench here. And then you're just going through and replacing all of these clips in the proper spot. And then that's it as far as the lift kit for the front end. The job itself, extremely easy. Spring compressor, not fun.
That is by far the longest part. It takes me longer just to compress and decompress those springs than it did anything else. If you have like a buddy with a wall mounted one, this could be an extremely fast job. Overall, job's easy, just extremely time consuming for the spring compression part, and I couldn't find a shop that would be willing to just compress it. So I did it all myself, no big deal. So now we're gonna move on to the rear. Also, do not forget to plug back in your power steering plugs that are underneath the vehicle, and then put your wheel back on, torque the lug nuts, and move to the rear. So for the rear end, make sure you get your vehicle jacked up in the air to where you have an inch or two of ground clearance. Have a jack underneath the rear end as well, and I gotta adjust mine obviously. And then once you get the truck up in the air, you can place your jack underneath the rear end to support it. Then you'll be removing the one bolt here that holds the strut in back here, and then you'll be removing these 4 fasteners here on your U bolts, and it'll allow the leaf spring and the rear end to separate, and you can adjust the room you need by your jack underneath your rear end, and then you'll put your block in here. So I'm gonna go ahead, get my jack resituated, and then remove this. This is going to be a 21, at least it is on mine, and then we're going to be replacing these fasteners with the supplied ones, and those are going to be 22 millimeters, and you're going to be replacing the U-bolts and installing a block. We've now removed the bolt that holds the shock in. Now we'll be removing these 4 here. That whole bottom bracket's going to come off, so this will be sitting up in there. You can see it has the tab that sits right on this bracket, and then in the top has a hole. Well, the new spacer is going to be the same setup. Drop the peg in the hole, and then you're going to place this assembly up in here, and then drop your U-bolts over it. Replace this bracket and bolt it back up. So getting the block in is just a matter of making adjustments here, and you may have to get in your wheel well and kind of move your rear end, because it's going to be able to shift around in order to line those tabs back up. So now all we're gonna do is drop our U-bolts back down. Sorry, it's kind of difficult to hold the phone and do this at the same time. That's why I'm only showing you guys one side. This bracket will mount just like this, and you'll use the new supplied hardware. There we have the hardware installed on the rear. Make sure you kind of alternate to make sure that they go on evenly. Now all we have to do is take our shock, get it lined up, and put the bolt through and tighten it up, and then we'll be good to go. Everything's reinstalled. We are good to go. And that is it for the 2-inch lift. Now we're going to go ahead and take a measurement from the ground to the bottom of our wheel well. This truck sat at 38 inches before, from the ground to the bottom of the wheel well right here. That was completely empty. I do now have a few hundred pounds in the back end. 40 1/8. And 40 1/2. So a little bit higher in the front, but once again, keep in mind that I do have a couple 100 to 300 pounds in the rear end. But that's it as far as the install of the Rough Country 2-inch lift kit for the new 2023 Chevy Colorado. And this is a Trail Boss. It can be installed on the other trim levels as well.
All right, so the lift is all installed. Got it done yesterday. It took me probably about 6 hours, a little bit longer than it should have, or that I planned on it taking, but it is what it is. Basically 20 minutes before I was done with my lift, I got the message stating my wheels and tires had shown up. So I went over directly after getting the lift kit installed and got the wheels and tires put on. Really happy that I got the lift done before getting these installed. Definitely would have had some rubbing. The only time I've had rubbing is right here on the lower air dam when backing out of my driveway, just because of the angle, I believe. But we're going to be removing that anyways, so there will be no rubbing or cutting of anything or anything like that. As far as specs on these, I will include that right now. These are the Falcon Wild Peak AT3Ws. They are a 285/70 R17. I've ran these before in the past, probably for about the last 5 years, and really like these tires. So I went with them again. These are a little bit larger than my last set. I like them because there's not a whole lot of road noise, but you have good traction, good off-road overlanding type wheel, yet something that's not too aggressive for the street. And then the wheels are the Black Rhino Shoguns. These are a 17x9 with a -38 or -39 offset. It's only available in one of those, but it is the 6x139.7, the same thing that you find on the Sierra and Silverado. It's not, the old bolt pattern is not 6x120, so if you're ordering wheels, do not get 6x120. But yeah, that is my wheel and tire setup. It does have a little bit of stick out, not too much. I think it's just the perfect look for me. It's what I prefer, and I think it turned out really nicely. And with that 2-inch lift, may not be everybody's taste, but I love the wheels, I love the tires, I love the height of the truck. It's not too much, but plenty of ground clearance, and we'll have a few more videos coming on the skid plate and more LED lighting, a lot of stuff for the bed area, and many other videos. So stay tuned, and I really hope you guys enjoyed. If you have a question down below, if you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, and other than that, I'll see you guys in the next one. And if you haven't subscribed, make sure to subscribe.